Hello, welcome to the Cinema Savvy Movie Podcast, the channel for film reviews, discussions and everything in between. I'm Chris Garner, joined with my co-host Tate and the Hour, and today we're reviewing arguably one of the biggest films of this year, the highly anticipated 24th entry in the James Bond franchise, Spectre, directed by Sam Mendes. As always, with this review, we're going to start off with a spoiler-free section, and later on in the review we'll get onto a spoiler section. To be honest with you, probably the bulk of this review will be in the spoilers. I think more than any film we've reviewed on this channel, this one's going to be the most difficult to actually talk about without giving anything away.
Well, but, Star Wars later on in the year, but
oh god, yeah, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, but yeah, we'll do our best with the spoiler-free, and then we'll let you know when we get onto the spoilers. Lots to talk about on this one, so let's get into our review for Spectre.
You had no authority. None. Mexico City. What were you doing there?
I was taking some overdue holiday.
So what's going on, James? They say you're finished.
What do you think?
I think you're just getting started.
Magnificent, isn't she? 0 to 60 in 3.2 seconds. A few little tricks up her sleeve.
Do one more thing for me.
What do you have in mind?
Make me disappear. Tell me where he is.
He's everywhere.
If you go there, you're crossing over to a place where there is no mercy.
You're protecting someone.
Get away from me! Why should I trust you?
Because right now, I'm your best chance of staying alive. This organization, do you know what it's called?
Its name is Spectre.
And do you know who links them all?
Me.
Welcome, James.
You came across me so many times, yet you never saw me.
What took you so long?
Okay, so I think we should start off really with our thoughts on the Bond franchise in general, because as I was saying, like, I've said this on the channel loads before, I've never been a huge Bond fan, even with these Daniel Craig ones, really. It's just, the spy espionage genre is just something I've never been, it's not been my bag, really, and I've never seen any of the older ones until quite recently. I tried to do a Bond marathon, and I realised the futility of that when you realise that there's 23 other films that came out before this one. I'd seen all of the Daniel Craig ones before this one, but I'd never seen any of the, the older ones, the Connery ones, the Moore ones, anything like that. So I actually did pretty well. I think I got up to midway through the Roger Moore ones, and you've got
a lot to go then.
Oh, I've got loads to go. I've got Dalton, I've got Brosnan. I still haven't got to Brosnan yet. But even the old ones, they had a charm about them, but they're just films that were sort of one and done ones for me. They're sort of like the Marvel films. Like, I'll see them, I won't regret seeing them because I can tick them off my list of films that I've now seen, but they're not ones that I'd ever probably go back to. And I was even sort of like that with the Daniel Craig ones. I mean, I went to see Skyfall when it came out in 2012, I believe that came out. Jesus Christ, that's gone quick. And I haven't gone back to see that again. Quantum of Solace I watched when it came out on DVD. Haven't been back to see that. I think the only one probably I've watched multiple times was Casino Royale. But yeah, so going into this one, I really didn't know what to expect. I'd seen the trailers, and as I said, because I wasn't a huge Bond fan, I wasn't like one of those people that saw the trailer and got instantly hyped. It's not like one of those Star Wars moments for me where I have to do a reaction for it or anything like that. But I feel that, and we'll get into this more, that with me seeing the older ones now before this one, I had a lot more context for certain characters, certain mannerisms to characters, and I think that because of that, I appreciated this one a lot more than the previous ones I saw.
Yeah, well, for me, Bond, I am a huge Bond fan. I followed Bond for almost all of my life. One of the first films I saw was, I believe it was Man with the Golden Gun. I completely love the Bond franchise to bits. I love the old ones. I'm okay with the new ones. Like you were saying, there aren't too many films which are rewatchable in the Bond franchise. I would say that Daniel Craig-wise, Casino Royale is the one to rewatch over and over again. It was a brilliant introduction as him as a Bond. And I feel like I wasn't a fan of Skyfall personally.
Yeah, same.
I had big problems with Skyfall, massive problems, to do with its, just the way that the film was presented, the whole, just plot of it, and just, it wasn't Bond. It was, I'm an action hero, I'm a soldier basically, whilst Bond is suave, he is this espionage, spy person, mystery about him, he's cheeky, he's got the quick one-liners, he is just the true British gentleman, whilst this new Bond, which Daniel Craig introduced more into Quantum of Solace and Skyfall, was I am a soldier, my mission is to kill, which I didn't like so much.
Yeah, and I think that's where really people are going to come down on. It's whether you like this particular incarnation of Bond. I'm probably going to bring this example up a few times throughout towards the end of the review, but the way I see this new Bond franchise is almost the equivalent of Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. For me, my favourite kind of Batman films are the older Tim Burton ones, the more not so much light-hearted, but they didn't take themselves as seriously. It was
So
sort of
you liked Batman and Robin. It's okay. It's
You
fine.
know what? I will defend Batman and Robin till my dying day.
Wow.
I
That
love
sounds
that
like
film.
a fight that we can put
And
up.
you know what? You know what? If you want controversy, here's some controversy for you right here. I would rather watch Batman and Robin any day to Dark Knight Rises. I'm just saying. But that's
And
a
everyone
charged
has
statement.
now left the video. We can talk about whatever we want.
Hey, when I first reviewed, I'm going off on a massive tangent here. When I first reviewed Dark Knight Rises, I think I reviewed it on the day of release. Actually, I gave it a negative review. I received death threats for that. So, but
It's because Nolan gets a free pass. Didn't you know that?
yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a discussion of review for another time. But it's sort of comparison to the Batman films. Like some might like the sort of just fun superhero movie with Batman in it. Just go and enjoy it. It's entertaining. And then the Nolan ones comes along. It makes it more realistic. It really adds a deeper level to the character. And the whole sort of superhero angle of it takes a back seat, and it's more like a crime drama with a grizzled, dark hero. And that's the way I see these new Bond films. It really... The older ones, you didn't really focus so much on the character of Bond. It was really just the elements of the character. It was, as you said, like the one-liners. It was the womanizer. It was the fast cars. It was the action. It was all that kind of stuff. Whereas now, and especially with Skyfall, they really try to delve into his character. I mean, Skyfall went all into his his parentage and his past.
No, but
and
they were
everything
trying
like
to
that.
delve into his character while still making him duller than he was.
Yeah, and that's my problem with the new Bonds. To me, maybe not Casino Royale. I think out of these newer ones, Casino Royale
Casino Royale,
probably
he
had the
still
best
had
tone.
that. He still had the suave. He still
Yeah.
had the cheekiness.
I
And they
think
ripped it away from him in the final scenes.
Yeah, I think Casino Royale just had the best tone, and now it's, do you want to go and see a Bond movie that's now this dull, depressive, you know what, I'm going to say boring Bond. I've never been a fan of Daniel Craig as Bond, especially now I've seen some of the older ones. I mean, loads of people say that Connery's their favourite Bond, and I could totally see that. I'm really liking Roger Moore. As I said, I haven't got to Dalton or Brosnan yet, but there's just none of the... When I look at Daniel Craig as Bond, it's like he's trying to be charismatic, he's trying to be suave, and it's just not coming through. And I think what that is... And to be honest, I know we haven't really got into the main film yet, but I think this is important to talk about before we get into it. It's your opinion of Bond and how the tone they've made for him with these new ones. It seems like they almost don't know what to do with him. Skyfall definitely tried to make him more of a character and show the darker side of the character. but then they still sprinkle in elements, even in this one as well, where they'll throw in some of the callbacks to the older gadgets. And I mean, you want that from a Bond movie, but with the tone that these movies go for, it's almost out of place. And that's another comparison I can bring to sort of Dark Knight Rises, where the previous two films were very much grounded in reality. And then when they throw outlandish things like in Dark Knight Rises, where he breaks his back and he recovers from it by someone just punching his spine into place and he's fine. Some people could say, "Oh, well, that's Batman. You can do that." Of course, it's the character of Batman can get out of anything, and it's like, well, in the older, more superhero ones, you can say that because that was the consistent tone of them. Whereas in these new ones, when you make everything realistic, you can't do that as much, and that's just the way I see it. I'm not sure that this darker representation of Bond is necessarily the best way forward for the franchise. And I think if they do eventually get another Bond, and we'll talk about this later as well, without going into any spoilers, I do think that the ending of this film, if this was Sam Mendes' last one, which is talked about, and if this is in fact Daniel Craig's final outing as Bond, I do think that the ending of this film ties everything up and is a fitting ending for this incarnation of Bond. But I don't know. Now I've seen the old ones, I would like to see it go more to. It doesn't have to be really light-hearted and campy like the old 60s or 70s ones, but I do think that what this film lacks is levity, and I think that it could have benefited with that.
I think that there was one film which changed Bond, and it wasn't a Bond film that changed it. I think the Bourne Identity and the Bourne series changed the genre completely.
Yeah.
It became a lot more realistic, it became a lot more practical effects with the action, and I know in this film, Spectre, there is a couple of fight scenes which look very practical, like a Bourne film. And I think it's trying too hard to replicate the emotions that people brought through with Bond, is like with the Bourne films. It's trying to reinvent itself into something which has already changed the genre. It just, sometimes the films just don't fit in if they're trying to pretend to be something else. If you want to go see a spy comedy action film, you would usually go and see an old Bond film. Now you have to go see a film called Spy with these deadbeat actors and looking for a paycheck no matter where, doesn't matter where it comes from. If you want to go see a gritty film, you would have gone and seen the Bourne films. You go see The Raid 2. Now it's you go see Spectre. You go there to be depressed. There's nothing happy about the films.
But I'm glad you brought up the point of the Bourne films, because I even think the fight choreographer of those films worked on Casino Royale. I don't know if he's worked on all the other ones, but you're right, the action's very much more grounded, it's more hard hitting, I would say. And people listening to this might think that we're harping on this film, and if I'm going to go into my brief thoughts now, it's quite the opposite. I actually really kind of enjoyed this film quite a bit, actually. Huge improvement on Skyfall, in my opinion. One thing I think that Skyfall was lacking was the action. I mean, with this kind of genre, you need that action, and when I think back to Skyfall, all I remember is the train sequence, which is the opening 10 minutes of the film, and then there's pretty much nothing until the end.
There was a fight scene underwater at some point, wasn't there?
Was there?
But it was pretty forgettable. It was towards
I
the
can't
end.
even remember.
It was like under ice, and
well, that's what I mean. It was like there was no action in between that. I think this one's a lot better pace in terms of its action, although I do think that this film does suffer with pace, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But I mean, if I'm gonna rank these Bond films now before we get in more in depth into it, I think that this one doesn't quite beat out Casino Royale for me, but it's probably my second favourite one of this new Daniel Craig incarnation. And I think that what this film does better than Skyfall, for example, is that I think it plays a lot more on some of the older tropes of Bond, a little more, still not in a fun, entertaining way in that respect, but I think, and this may have just been benefited because I've seen some of the older ones now and had more context for, I was picking up on a lot more little nuances with it. Probably that's down to Dave Bautista's character as well as the henchman, and I don't even think Skyfall had that, did it? It was pretty much just Silver, played by Javier Bardem, and it had none of that, so I think this film was a lot better in that respect. But in terms of this one, your thoughts before going into Spectre, were you excited because it was just another Bond film coming out, or were you skeptical that it might be sort of the same tone as Skyfall and not live up to much?
I don't think people realise how much I hated Skyfall.
Yeah.
I don't think you realise how much I hated Skyfall. If I was going to rank the Bond films, I'd go with Daniel Craig alone. I'd go Casino Royale at the very, 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 very top.
Yeah.
Then it's a tie between this film and Quantum. Now, how depressing is that?
Really?
And then I put Skyfall. I'd put Skyfall at the very bottom.
See,
I really didn't like Skyfall.
And by the sounds of that review, you're going to put this next to Quantum of Solace. This sounds like you didn't like this film at all, which really surprised me. Because I was expecting to come into this thinking, I enjoyed going to see it. It's probably not one I'll go and see again, because that's just purely for the fact I'm not a huge Bond fan. I thought you were going to come out of this singing
Here's
its
the
praises.
thing, though. I'm going to buy this DVD and probably watch it again.
This is going to be a really interesting, because we should say this as well. I saw this last night. I saw this on opening night at about I think it was a 9:15 showing. You're pretty much fresh out the cinema, like you got back.
I came out the cinema exactly 45 minutes ago, and I have a sour taste in my mouth.
Oh, right. And we'll get into it a bit more now, I guess. So the plot for this film, it picks up right where Skyfall left off, really. See, this is going to show my knowledge now of Bond. Is it MI5? Is it MI6? It's MI6. There we go.
MI6.
They've gone
MI5's
through,
the real one.
Yeah, they've gone through a massive shake-up because obviously Judi Dench's character, spoiler alert for Skyfall, she didn't make it through to the end of that film, and now Ralph Fiennes is the new M. And following this, they've merged with MI5, and there's a new character in it called C, played by... I'm sorry, I don't know the actor's name. He plays Moriarty.
Wait a sec,
in
Andrew
BBC
Scott.
Sherlock. Andrew Scott, he plays Moriarty in the BBC Sherlock. He's sort of the head of that. He's setting up all surveillance. He's watching all their every move, so he knows where their agents are and everything like that. And then Bond, through various trials and tribulations, comes face to face with probably the biggest villain he's gone up against so far. And that's really the plot of this one. It's very simple, but then again, with a Bond film, you sort of want a simple plot. You don't want to overcomplicate it too much. I also want to say, I know we're going through like almost a Peter Jackson level backstory here before we get to the review. This was one of the most just infuriating viewing experiences of a film I've ever had. Not so much because of the film. The showing before the one I went to see was completely sold out, which was to be expected. Bond's a huge film. Yeah. And the one I went to, I asked the person behind the desk, she said, there's 15 people in your screening. I was like, perfect. It's going to be complete and utter silence. And as always, I picked the unlucky seat because 3 people behind me literally didn't shut up talking, and they were speaking very loud, laughing all the way through the entire film. All 2 hours, I want to say 2 hours 30, 2 hours 40 like of this film.
No, it was 2 hours 30. It's the longest Bond film, I think.
Yeah. They didn't stop talking. Even the quiet bits when you wanted to, because there's some moments in this where it really plays on silence and building the tension, which I really loved. This person just kept talking, and I kept turning round and turning round. They seemed to quieten down at the action, but it was just non-stop, and it really kind of honestly ruined my viewing experience of this film. Because when I go and see a movie, I don't see how people can pay money to see a film and just talk all the way through it. You pay money to be there to watch the film, talk afterwards, talk before, that's fine. You can talk during the adverts and everything like that, but when that film starts, you need to be quiet. And this has been the worst viewing experience at the cinema I've ever had. But with that said, let's finally get into it. So the film.
Wait a sec. Just to add to that, the worst one that I've possibly ever had was when a person got up and clapped at the end of Jurassic World.
Oh.
I turned to my friend with the most concerning look, and he turned back to me with an equally concerning look.
You know what? I would rather have them applaud that movie than they would like a new Transformers film or something, because I have seen people applaud Transformers: Dark of the Moon, and I hated everyone in that room at that moment. But anyway, let's get into the review now. So we'll kick off with the new Bond theme, actually, by Sam Smith, Writings on the Wall. This was quite interesting, actually. I can't actually remember which video I spoke about this, but it was when the news was coming out about the pre-production of Bond and everything like that. And me and George were sort of discussing back and forth of predicting who we thought would do the new theme for the film. And I just thought, who's popular at the minute? I said, I could see Sam Smith doing this song. And George was like, oh God, no, I hope it's not him. I really, really hope it's not him. He can't sing very well. And then, like a few months later, surprise, surprise, who's given the song? Sam Smith. And it came out a good few weeks ago, I think. Um, I really don't know what to make of this song. I think as a song on its own, it's passable.
Yeah.
I think it's
better
kind
than
of.
Skyfall.
Oh, you see, no, I prefer Skyfall. I think
Skyfall
the tone
made no sense.
I think the tone of that song very much fit that film, and I think tonally this one does too. I think it's just a case of the lyrics are very weak, and I'm sorry, Sam Smith, but it's that high singing gets really grating. It to me, it's a passable song, but as a Bond song, it doesn't quite do it. It's no, you know my name from Casino Royale, which is still one of my favourite Bond songs. And I've got a soft spot for the Bond songs from like the 80s and stuff like that. I love Duran Duran's View to a Kill. I love Aha's Living Daylights, stuff like that. But
I have to say I like this Bond song, but only after watching the film. When I listened to it on the radio, I was it's okay, it's slow. That's 2 slow songs in a row. I don't think I can deal with another one. It's the fact that he went out and said, I wrote this song in 20 minutes. That I thought, oh, you don't say that.
Yeah.
That'll just anger everyone.
Yeah.
That's suicide.
But I agree with that. I think that when you see it in the film, I mean, obviously you always get your opening action scene and then the opening credits always follows that. I do think that when you see it with the cinematic, which is really quite impressive, they use quite a lot of CG in there. It looks very different, I would say, to most Bond opening sequences. I mean, the ones that you're familiar with are usually the silhouettes of the naked women just dancing.
It reminds me of Die Another Day. The
I
title
haven't seen that
sequence for
one yet.
It reminds me a lot
yet.
of that. It's very kind of that kind of colours in the title sequence, if I remember Die Another Day title sequence, but it was also the actions of what the ladies were doing with their dancing when they were on screen was very reminiscent of the Pierce Brosnan films.
But you were saying about like the slow, like a second slow song in a row. Well, I'm sorry, but that's what you're going to get when you make a Bond film that's cerebral and fairly slow paced and all that, and there's a character study on Bond. When you do that, you're gonna get a song like that. Until they go fun, I'm never gonna get another Duran Duran Until We Dance Into the Fire, like a song like that.
I wouldn't even mind if it was Gary Barlow, as long as he wrote, because he's okay at songwriting, not so much as singing, but if they just did an upbeat Bond song, maybe we'll get an upbeat Bond film.
Yeah. So we're going to do something a little different with the review now. So we're going to try this out, see if it works for other reviews. Again, it's going to be difficult with this one because we don't want to give too much away. I mean, I saw, not to badmouth IGN because I don't want them to slap like a law enforcement order on this review or anything like that, but I think in their review they gave quite a lot away. They went through like the entire plot, which was meant to be a spoiler-free one. But we're each going to give our number one positive thing from the film and also our biggest negative of the film. And then we're going to talk about that a little bit and then we'll go into characters later on. So if I kick off with a positive, I think for me, although this film is still very much a serious Bond, which I'm not sure is the kind of Bond I want, I liked that this one more so than Skyfall and definitely Quantum of Solace. I think it used a lot more of sort of the older tropes. You had the cars in it. You went back to a classic villain. You had a henchman. You had your exotic locations, and I think that it did a lot of a better job with the action. So in terms of taking like the core Bond sensibilities and modernising it, I think it did a good job in that regard, regardless of what your thoughts are on the new interpretation of Bond. I think that this was a lot better paced in terms of that Although, if I'm going to throw my negative out now, my negative is to do with the pacing of everything else. I think that when this film hits its second act, I think it does almost slow to a crawl. A lot of people in my screening were getting restless. You could see them sort of checking their watches, adjusting in their seats, and everything like that, because this is a long movie. And I do think that when this film kicks off, it really hits you hard with that spectacular opening sequence, which we'll talk about in the spoilers. But then when it hits the second act, I do think that the pacing just like the drag shoot is let loose, I think. And then it does pick up towards the end again, but I think that the biggest fault of this movie is that it didn't need to be 2.5 hours. It really didn't. I think you could have like cut about 15 to 20 minutes out of this film, perhaps. There's a whole subplot that goes on at MI6, which I don't think really amounted to all that much. And I think if you'd have lost all that stuff and kept it a little bit more focused to Bond, I think that this could have been a really tight Bond film. As it is, I think that the pacing and the length is a bit too long. But if you can look past that, I think that because it brings in the tropes of some of the older Bonds, I think this is one of the most enjoyable of the Daniel Craig Bond films.
I disagree.
Okay. I thought you might. Go on,
first of all, my favourite scene, we'll probably talk about it in the actual spoiler section, but Dia de los Muertos.
Mm-hmm.
The opening scene, the Day of the Dead festival.
Oh, yeah.
That was brilliant.
Memorable.
Very well done. One of the best opening scenes, I think, from a Bond film.
Hell, opening shots, man, in films in general. That was incredible.
Absolutely amazing. It was so well shot. It was brilliantly put together, well choreographed. The stunts were amazing. Just everything about it, even the themes of it. The fact that they were able to bring in the festival and all the characters dressed up as the different people in the Day of the Dead festival, which is this massive event which actually happens in Mexico every year.
Yeah.
And in fact, it is my Halloween costume this year.
Is it? Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And I think my friend was telling me as well, 2,000 extras were in that scene, and I believe they closed the entire street off. And as well, I mean, we'll talk about it more in the spoilers, but the whole sequence in Rome as well, they completely closed the Vatican off and everything like that. And I mean, that's just unheard of. It's very rare that they allow them to do that, but I mean, when you see it on the screen, it's incredible.
The negative is too many. I can't say the word because it would spoil it. Can we move on to the spoiler section now?
We'll move on to the spoiler section later.
Man.
Can you tell us what the negative is without giving too much away? Just like really sort of.
There's
minimal?
too much of one thing in the film, and it completely ruins it as it takes away the focus from the main object of the film.
I think are you referring to the subplot at MI6?
I'm referring to a bit more than that.
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll save that then because I don't want people in the comments just angrily just typing because we've already had one hater on one of these videos.
Are you spoiling the film for us?
So we'll get into the characters more now. So obviously you've got Daniel Craig as Bond. Pretty much same as ever in this. He's sort of very stone-faced. He's very stoic. Not as much charisma in this one, but I don't know whether it was the choice of set pieces in this one. I definitely enjoyed the action with him a lot more in this. It's very difficult because considering these newer ones really try and make Bond a character, it's still really difficult to talk about him. If
you're going to make Bond a character, you need a person who can actually play with character.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm not a huge fan of Daniel Craig. To be honest, I haven't seen every single Daniel Craig film, so I'm sure there's more than this. Road to Perdition, he is fantastic in that movie. That is when Daniel Craig is acting. But in this, it just seems like... And I guess we could talk about this as well, like the whole behind-the-scenes stuff that's been going out recently, where someone said... And this may have been misquoted and blew out of proportion. I know how all that stuff works, but they asked him, would you ever come back to do another Bond? And he said, I'd rather slit my own wrists than come back and do Bond again. He says that he was bored. Someone said, like, who would you like to play another Bond? He was like, oh, I don't care. And it was like, would you come back and play Bond? And it was like, if I do come back and play Bond, it would only be for the money. And to the point where the studio basically had to shut him up because this was literally like a week before release. I mean, it's not very professional. But to be honest, you can almost see that coming from him on screen. He most of the time he looks bored, and that might be the incarnation he wants to play. He might want to play this more weathered Bond and not as much as the gentleman spy that we're
The word
sort of been
assassin
used
gets
to.
thrown around a lot in this film.
Yeah, and
And
like going back
instead
to
of him being the spy, he is now the assassin.
yeah, and going back to your point with like the Jason Bourne movies, it's almost exactly the same initials, and pretty much exactly the same. But so yeah, it's difficult what else to talk about Bond. Really, it's Bond. He's the womanizer. We have two Bond girls in this one, or sort of one and a half. One shows up for like a few scenes and is out of it. That the first is Monica Bellucci, who I believe is the oldest Bond woman we've had. I think she's she's either 50 or early 50s. But fair enough. I've got nothing against that. I think that's completely fine. I thought the scenes with her and Bond still worked as much as anything that he is with oh, it's a French name. Leah Seydoux? Seydoux? I've probably completely butchered that pronunciation.
I will go onto Wikipedia and see how you pronounce her name.
My French learning is letting me down here. But, I mean, she was in films like she was in Mission Impossible 4, which is probably the one I've seen her the most in. I thought she played a fantastic Bond girl. She plays... she has a back and forth with Bond more so than others. I mean, watching the older ones, and I guess this was because they were a product of their time, the older Bonds were very misogynistic. They were just sort of there for eye candy and not much else. But in this one, she stands up to Bond on a number of occasions. She has a bit more going for her. I don't think she's quite as good as the likes of Vesper from Casino Royale.
No.
But God, a darn sight better than the one in Skyfall. I can't even remember the one in Skyfall. In fact, in Skyfall, I don't even...
Was there a Bond girl in Skyfall?
I think it's the one where doesn't Silver, the villain, put like a glass of whiskey on top of her head or something and tell Bond to shoot her?
Oh, she was forgettable.
Yeah, exactly. You see what this one actually is much in line with the previous, like the older Bonds, where the Bond girl will be with him throughout the entire film, throughout the entire adventure. And I think that's what it needs. So she was great.
I'm ready to pronounce her name, by the way.
Go for it.
Léa Hélène Seydoux Fournier de Clausson.
Wow. Can you say that 10 times fast? Well, bravo. And then if you're going to talk about other characters, your other major one that we have to talk about is Christoph Waltz as the villain.
Waltzy.
As soon as he was cast, and when that first trailer came out, and he's in the trailer, he's sitting at the desk, surrounded, and he's just silhouetted, and you just hear his voice, and it's perfect. And I was watching that trailer thinking, yes, this is going to be one of the best Bond villains we've ever had. And after watching this film, I will completely stand by that claim. I thought Le Chiffre from Casino Royale couldn't be topped in these new ones. Just completely blown out of the water in this one. Christoph Waltz plays a chilling, menacing villain. I can't go into too much in depth about him with this, but just bear in mind he is probably one of the best Bond villains. And if this is Daniel Craig's last Bond film, probably the most fitting Bond villain they could have posed him against. I thought Christoph Waltz stole every single scene in this film. To me, he was the standout one out of the entire film. I kind of wish we'd have had more scenes with him, to be honest. I'm thinking back to the film now. I mean, he did get more prominent towards the end, but I think that the film could have benefited with a few more scenes of him. But then again, when you think about his character, I think that his shadow is cast over this entire film. So even when he's not on screen, you still feel his presence. And I thought, I mean, I would love to see him come back if they ever do choose to bring him back, or maybe they won't. But Christoph Waltz was amazing in this film.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't know how they would bring him back.
We don't want to go too much into spoilers here with that.
If they managed to, then that would be something, I guess. One redeemable thing from the film was his performance. I haven't seen a single film where he's pulled a bad performance. He's one of those actors who can play the good guy, the bad guy, the any guy, and you can always trust him in a film, no matter what you stick it in. And I mean, Tarantino trusts him, so everyone else should. So
I can remember him in a bad movie. He was in that. Do you remember that god awful Three Musketeers film that came out a few years ago, the 3D one?
Oh god, he wasn't in that, was he?
I believe he played one of the villains in that. I'm sure he was great in it.
Oh god, he was in that.
But the thing is with Christoph Waltz is that he always kind of plays the same character. Like, even when he's in Django Unchained and he's playing a good guy, there's still that element there where you think, this guy might be a bad guy. He always kind of has the same mannerisms in his film, but that's, not a slight against him at all, because I think that he's just fantastic in everything he's in. And then, briefly, we can sort of just skirt over the other returning cast members. Ralph Fiennes returns once again from Skyfall as the new M. We have Naomi Harris playing Moneypenny, Ben Whishaw playing Q, the gadgets guy, and I've forgotten his name again, god damn it. A new character from this one is, as I said, Moriarty. God damn it! I'm sorry. I'm sorry. See, that's the one. Andrew Scott. That's the one. Andrew Scott. I'm gonna remember that. I've got the Wikipedia page up here. I can't believe I keep forgetting his name. And that's about it really for like returning the cast members. So
we've got a new cast member though. Dave Bautista.
Dave Bautista, yes, who plays the henchman in this. Mr. Hinks, I believe his name is.
Mr. Hinks, yes.
Just what this series needed. We needed a henchman, and my God, he doesn't disappoint from his introductory scene, which I won't spoil here. You know exactly where you stand with this character. Very reminiscent to me of the likes of Oddjob from Goldfinger.
I'd say Jaws.
Jaws as well, yeah, I can totally see that. But yeah, it's a great addition to this new sort of series and incarnation. Very imposing, and the fight scenes that he has with Bond are intense. They're powerful. The sound system that I could hear over the bloody people talking behind me, they were intense. You felt every single punch, every single slam, everything like that. And Dave Bautista is just making those acting gains. I mean, he was in Guardians of the Galaxy as Drax Destroyer. He was great in that movie. Now he's landed a role in Bond, and he's great. He does. For what he has to do in this film, just playing a henchman, playing a big guy that punches things, he does that incredibly well. Really loved his character in this. But as I say, we can't really go into detail. What I will say is that the likes of Ralph Fiennes, Naomi Harris, Ben Whishaw, they get a lot more to do in this film. As I said, there's a subplot that goes on with those and C in this movie, which, as I said, I think might distract from the overall narrative of the film that it was going for, and I think it does sort of complicate things, or maybe bring side characters into the forefront that perhaps don't need it as much. One thing I will say as well, now that I've seen some of the older Bond films, I really miss that James Bond Moneypenny back and forth they have in those old films. I mean, I know that Moneypenny carried on. I haven't got all the way through the Roger Moore ones yet, but man, the chemistry they had, she had with Sean Connery, was one of my favourite things in those movies. I mean, she was always pining after Bond silently. She'd always be like, "Oh, Bond, why don't you ever take me out?" and stuff like that. And he's like, "Oh, Moneypenny, you're the only woman for me," and stuff like that. And they were just little light, and that's what I'm talking about with the levity and things like that. And then M would always aggressively call him into the office and disrupt them. And I just think with these new ones, they sort of forgo all that. They have a few lines with each other.
He is an assassin. He's got to do his job instead of flirting with the secretary.
Yeah, and I just think that if those films had a little bit more of that, it would make it a lot more likeable. So to me, I think this is Moneypenny's second entry into this series, isn't it? I mean, she was in Skyfall. Yeah. They've made her more of an agent in this one, which I completely, buy. They did that in Skyfall as well. I like that new take, but I just think that a lot is lost on the actual character interaction with them. And I mean, with the next one, at the end credits, it says Bond will return. Unsurprisingly, it's going to go on. Probably way past after the day I die, Bond will still be going on in some incarnation. But I just think a lot's left. So as such, her character, and even Ralph Fiennes, I don't care about them as much, because you're not meant to care about them as much. They're sort of side characters to a bigger thing, whereas I think these new ones are trying to bring them, and you said before we hit record, it feels like Bond and the team, which I don't know if I like that kind
Bond
of thing.
And the gang, yeah,
it's literally like that, and I don't know if that kind of stuff works for Bond. I think that stuff works for more of like the Mission Impossible films. And I
Yeah.
love the Mission Impossible films. In fact, I will probably say that I preferred Mission Impossible Rogue Nation to this film. That film really took me by surprise, and before I went to see that one, as I said, like I wasn't into the big spy espionage genre. I watched that series before I went to see the fifth one and absolutely fell in love with that. And I think that the team aspect for that works. And one thing again that has, it has those lighter moments. It has those lighter character moments between all of the people, and you don't get that in this. I mean, I know we've hyped on the characters a lot, and we've been going for a while, so we'll probably move on to our next section now. The action, and again, we can't really go. It's really frustrating, this review. Like, we can't get into the details of it without giving anything away. But what I will say is that this is, without a doubt, some of the greatest action we've ever had in a Bond film, and I can say that confidently from what I've seen. Just the cinematography, the cinematographer, Hoyt van Hoytema, I believe that's how he's pronounced. He worked on Interstellar. Absolutely gorgeous. And I mean, every single frame of this film is just an absolute feast for the eyes. And, you know, my eyes were just like scanning the entire screen at the cinema, just taking in the beauty of it all. Not just like the scope from like the amount of extras they had and the staging and everything like that, which was impressive, but just the locations and everything like that. The set pieces in Austria and in Rome just look absolutely gorgeous. The lighting and everything like that. And you know what? The action's great. You get car chases, you get scenes where planes are chasing cars. Definitely a lot more action in this one, as I said, than Skyfall. I even want to say more action than Quantum of Solace and probably Casino Royale.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
Casino
Royale
Royale
was a poker game, basically.
Yeah, Casino Royale has the one where the bomb's about to go off with the jumbo jet. I know there's that. There's a lot of hand-to-hand fighting in it, but in terms of like big, grand, epic set-piece action things, I think this is definitely the most impressive. Absolutely love the action. Some of the best action I've seen this year in a film, and I can say that with confidence. Not quite as good as Mad Max Fury Road, but
No.
I know that nothing will ever top that. But it's still, in terms of like Bond, fantastic. Cannot fault the action.
I agree with you there to an extent. The action was very well done. It was very well put together. A little too much hand-to-hand combat mixed in with the other action. I feel like if it toned back on the hand-to-hand action, then maybe it would have been more Bond-like and less Bourne-like. But in the end, that part of the film didn't bother me too much. So we'll allow that.
And then we'll move on to direction now. So Sam Mendes is returning for his second outing at Bond following Skyfall. Unsurprising, the studio clearly want to keep him around and probably want to keep Craig around as well. They'll keep them around as long as these, until these movies start losing money or not making as many returns as they expect. And, they've done that with all the Bonds. When Connery gets stale and people lose interest, they get another one. And then when they've done enough more films, they get another one. And that's just how the studio works with this. One thing I will say is that I thought the direction was pretty good in Skyfall. I mean, I don't know how much of that and the tone of it goes to the director or whether that's the script writers or anything like that. But, I think that in terms of, organise... I mean, you just look at the sheer size, like the Day of the Dead sequence at the start. Can you imagine being the director of that scene and organising everything like that? I mean, the mind boggles at how...
I love that scene.
And just even like the other action scenes, like the whole thing with the plane and the snow, like I cannot imagine being the director on that and controlling all the elements of that scene. So I think that Sam Mendes is a great director. Whether I think that Bond is like his sort of natural home as a director is a different argument, but he's definitely improved since Skyfall, I think, because to me Skyfall was a much sort of smaller scale Bond film, much more personal story, which I really didn't care for. This, as I said, to me feels more like it's taken some of the well-known tropes from the Bond films and introducing them, still with not as much humour as I would like, but in terms of direction I cannot fault it because I thought it was fantastic. Now, whether I'd like to see him come back for the next one's a different argument. We've seen directors in the past where, when they're on a series for too long, the creativity wanes, they get fatigued with it. We see this with a lot of superhero things. Like, to me, even with Nolan, I think that the fatigue had set in with Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah.
and it wasn't quite as well put together as his previous two entries, Sam Raimi with the Spider-Man films, etc., things like that. So I think if he is
Why
on one
do I want to
project,
see a Wes Anderson James Bond?
well, we've got Ralph Fiennes in it,
Yeah.
so it's one step there, and
Turn it
indeed
into
the
a
one
comedy
who
again.
and indeed the one who plays the Bond girl was in that movie as well, wasn't she? I think you were saying before we hit record.
Yes, she
yeah,
was.
so
Yeah, she was in Grand Budapest.
but thinking about it now, I don't know. I know we're going into like the Bond franchise in general, and we'll probably have a video at some point. That'd be good to do of just like an entire just Bond conversation, just go through them all of what we liked and things like that. But when someone says like, who would you like for the new Bond? Who can you see directing the next Bond? I absolutely haven't got a clue. I know that Christopher Nolan has always said that he would like to work on a Bond movie, and we saw in even in Inception he took elements from like on Her Majesty's Secret Service with the whole skiing sequence in that, and he even said that that was one of the inspirations for that sequence. But to me, if they got a Nolan on it, I could see that being a logical director as a progression from Sam Mendes, and I mean he's worked with Warner Brothers before. Actually, no. No, Warner Brothers didn't work on this. Ignore me. But I think that Christopher Nolan would be a good fit. But I mean, the tone of that would be almost identical to these. You wouldn't have as much humor in them. It would be very dark, and it would be analysing Bond as a character. So I think whichever director they get next should be willing to go in a more light-hearted route, I would think.
Yeah, no, I completely agree there. I think that the film needs to become more light-hearted.
Yeah.
It's too dark, it's too sinister. It's going into places where nobody wanted to see a Bond film go. I don't want to keep on saying it, but it is becoming the Bourne franchise. I don't want to... I know I'm using that every single time, but that is what is happening. I mean, it's Bourne with fancier cars and suits. That's all it is now to me.
Yeah, and we'll sort of like round off here with our spoiler-free section. As I said, the sort of meat of this review and the discussion is going to come into the spoilers. So, I mean, if you haven't seen it and you're curious, we're going to give our recommendation in a minute. We'll sort of kick off this first with how do you think it stands up next to the previous Bond movies? Probably not so much the older ones because, they're of a different continuity, some would argue. This is definitely a reboot of the series when they started off with Casino Royale, so I think you've already ranked them, but if you want to talk a little bit more about that or sort of like mould your recommendation into that.
I sadly want to say they need to change the Bond. It's sad to see Daniel Craig go, but he hasn't added really anything to it. Maybe a grittiness, but that isn't what Bond is. It's tried to modernize it, like it's tried to go too modern. The only way forward is to replace him and possibly the director of the film. And if I was going to replace him, I have two candidates: Idris Elba, and Damian Lewis. Those are the only two people.
Damian Lewis definitely seems to be the favourite so far. I've seen Tom Hardy throughout there, but I mean, what roles isn't Tom Hardy throughout there for? He's
Tom Hardy. As soon as I see Tom Hardy now, I think Mad Max, and that is too brutal.
Yeah, I could see him like, oh, you know what they should do? They should totally just bring him in as Bane again. One, so I can hear that ridiculous voice, and two, he would be a sweet henchman, because he was a henchman in the movie that he was in.
Yeah.
But for me, didn't top Casino Royale, because to me, Casino Royale, tonally, it was modernised, but it still had a bit more fun to it. It felt more like the Gentleman Spy Bond with a modern edge, and I thought that was a fairly good blend. Obviously not as good as the originals, but I thought that was the best direction for it. And then with Quantum of Solace, it seemed to take like a whole other direction. Skyfall made it even more depressing, and this one I wouldn't say is as depressing as Skyfall. I think it's like trying to pick itself up a bit more, but it's still sort of like tethered to the realism. I understand everyone listening to this is probably thinking we're really down about this film. I know you are. I actually really enjoyed this film. Would I recommend it? Obviously I'd recommend it. It's one of the biggest films of this year. If you're a Bond fan, chances are, well, in the UK, you've probably seen it already. If you're in America, you're definitely going to see it like opening day or opening weekend or whatever. And I think it is a film that you should most certainly see on the big screen, if not for like the actual film, but some of the sequences in this are some of the most fantastic sequences I've probably ever seen in a film ever. Definitely
Yeah.
the opening sequence is one of the most memorable scenes I think I've ever seen in a film in terms of staging and everything like that. Um, Another thing I loved about the film is that it does indeed tie into all of the previous Daniel Craig Bond movies. There's a lot of references to Casino Royale, even Quantum of Solace as well, whether that will annoy a lot of people that begrudgingly they have to now accept Quantum of Solace into the
Might
Daniel
have to go
Craig
watch it again
continuity.
now, don't I?
Yeah, they refer to Skyfall as well, so I would almost recommend sort of having a marathon of the Daniel Craig ones before you go and see this one, because I think that if you do, I mean, I didn't see all of them. I watched Casino Royale a couple of days before I went to see this one, and even with that, there's loads of things that's referred to in this that I think if you haven't seen them since then, you might be lost in a lot of the plot points. And, if this is the last Daniel Craig Bond movie, I think that how it ends is definitely very fitting.
It comes
I think
full circle.
It does come full circle. It's the perfect ending for a Bond film. Um, he goes up against one of the biggest enemies he's had in these newer ones. And it refers back to all the previous ones. So as you said, it's sort of, I know it's not a trilogy unless you really, really want to take Quantum of Solace out of it. But, out of the four of them, I do think it's a fitting end. I think it's a film you should see on the big screen. It's a feast for the eyes. I would say it's an entertaining action flick as well. I mean, some of the action's incredible in it. But as I said, if you're looking for the fun Bond, like the Sean Connery or Roger Moore kind of Bond, you're still not going to find it here, unfortunately. It's very dark, it's very cerebral.
If you want to see the latest Bourne film, if you want to see the latest Bourne film before the new Paul Greengrass film comes out, then watch this.
Yeah, and if you want to see what Bond should be like, watch Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. Give that a watch. That has exotic locations. This new one essentially has a Bond girl throughout it as well. So I would recommend seeing that if you want to see a fun, inverted commas, Bond movie. But, I think this one is still a solid entry into the Bond franchise. It's definitely not one of the weakest ones, in my opinion. But anyway, now we're going to get into the meat of this review. We're going to have a proper conversation in our spoiler section. We haven't actually talked about, before we hit record on this, all the details of it, really. So this is just going to be completely new. We're probably going to go, I think the easiest way to do this is we're going to go almost scene by scene throughout the film, or location by location. We're just going to go through the entire film, have a back and forth, say what we liked, what we didn't. So take it first. So what would you want to talk about first in this spoiler section?
There is nothing wrong with Mexico. Absolutely nothing wrong with the opening scene. It was as I wanted it. It was just, I wish the whole movie was like that. There was comedy in there, there was drama, there was tension, there was action, there was stunts. That's a Bond film. Yeah. That is a Bond film. The title sequence as well, I'd say up to that point, you're on a good streak.
Yeah. Totally. And, that was the case with me with Skyfall as well. I loved the opening action scene to that and the title sequence, and then everything went downhill. Not so much for this film, though, for me. We've got to talk about the opening shot itself.
Was it done all one take?
I was looking out for the cuts, as I usually do. And with films like Birdman, you can kind of see if they spin the camera around fast, they'll cut it there. If they go into a doorway, it'll go black. I didn't notice any cuts to me. If it did take place, I would say it took place in the bedroom, probably.
And on the poster, I think.
Yeah, it could be there, definitely. But I didn't actually catch one myself. I love scenes like this. Unbroken scenes, when used well, can be really stylistic and effective, and I think it just gave a huge sense of the grand scale of this parade, this march, and as you said, like all the costumes and sets. I mean, we've harped on this scene loads in this one, but I will definitely say it's one of the best things I've seen
Something
on screen.
I'm going to watch on YouTube.
Yeah, you know what?
Over and over.
you were saying you're still gonna buy this DVD or this Blu-ray.
Yeah, I
Just
will.
watch that opening 10 minutes. You are good. And even the action scene in the helicopter was intense. There's a little bit of shaky green screen in parts, which does take you off guard a little bit. But it's really quick. The camera's fast. You don't notice it all that much.
You noticed the shaky green screen in the old Bonds. That wasn't the problem.
Those screens are amazing.
The problem is what happens after the opening scenes.
One thing I will say though about the opening scene, I want to say, conveniently placed couch.
Yes.
And
just like the whole Saved by the Bell in Die Another Day.
Yeah,
Which
but you
you
know
haven't
what?
watched yet, so you won't understand the reference to.
No, I have not seen that. I'll have to watch this video back after I've seen it. But with stuff like that, I know I'm gonna sound like really just like picky about this now, but say if that was in an old Bond film, I'd be fine with it. But when these new ones really sort of like suck out the humour and all of the, as I was saying, like you can't just go, oh well, that happened because he's Bond. Like he thought there's a couch there, of course it is. He's Bond. He's gonna get up and carry on.
Yeah.
When you said it realistically, I was watching it there, and when he landed on that couch, I went, bullshit. Like that couch would be there, it just happened to be there. And my mate turned to me and he was like, yeah, but it's it's fun. It's Bond. And I'm like, it is Bond, but it's not fun. That shouldn't happen. He should have hit the ground and just like broken his ankle.
I have to say, up until that point, it was funny. It had
Yeah.
action in it, and there was a comedy theme running through it.
Yeah,
I didn't.
totally.
I think there was one point in the rest of the film where I laughed, and I can't even remember what that is now.
You know what? Honestly, my entire audience, apart from the aforementioned 3 people behind me, completely just silent. And I don't know if that was because they were completely enraptured with the film and totally engrossed in it, or or what it was. But there was no moments where they chuckled, where they laughed. They were just sort of just staring at the screen. And you know what I'm thinking? And I probably sort of like sniggered in parts or chuckled, but there was no laugh out loud moments or anything like
No.
that. And then we get onto our title sequence. Beautifully crafted opening sequence. Very different, I would say, to some of the Bond things. It really plays on the imagery of Spectre. There's a lot of, octopi. And they play up this whole, octopuses with ink. And you got like the dancing girls, and they dissolve into the black ink, and it looked incredible. Absolutely loved that sequence, regardless of my thoughts on the actual song itself.
Song was better after the title sequence.
Yeah.
Like, I preferred it. Listening to it on the radio, it was not the best experience, but seeing the title sequence with it, it fits it, and I'm okay with it now.
Yeah, and then, right, this is what I want to talk about now. When he goes back to London, you get this whole subplot, this new character introduced called C, who is part
definitely
of...
not Moriarty.
Yeah, who's, he's the head of MI5. I believe he's the head of MI5, and he's merging with MI6 because he wants to control it, because he thinks it's getting out of hand. This is honestly pretty much the plot to Mission Impossible Rogue Nation.
I would say it's also the plot to the prequel Star Wars films, Politics, in an action film.
They, they want to survey them all. They want to keep it under control. I think they even want to sort of like dissolve the entire 00 organization.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, you know that this isn't a good guy. There's going to be no redemption for this character. You cast the guy who played Moriarty, who, I'm sorry, I mean, I'm sure he's a really
Most
sweet,
evil
cool
man
guy.
on TV.
He looks evil. He looks terrifying. He looks like he's up to no good. And you see this film, and he's exactly that. To the point where, now this was a theory I thought when I saw him. Luckily, they didn't do this. You know what? Actually, I'm going to save this to when we talk about Christoph Waltz. I'll come back to this.
Fine.
But yeah, this the whole subplot they introduce, and as I said with you've got M, Moneypenny, even Q to an extent sort of gets caught up into this. This is sort of a little tacked on subplot to the film just to give those characters something to do, and when you get to the end of the film, I'm not sure it pays off in a satisfying way. It seemed like a very sort of, not cliched thing to do, but just an easy thing to do with this kind of, the 00 organisation is bad because, I mean, look at all the lives they've saved over the years and everything, but they're bad. Let's dissolve it. And as such, the character just has nothing. He's stock bad guy who wants to survey everything. That's all he
Yeah.
amounts to. And
He is the evil villain from Ghostbusters, the
Yeah.
bureaucrat.
yeah,
And he gets his comeuppance, and so does he.
yeah, and I didn't hate these scenes, but I was just sort of watching it thinking, this isn't really adding anything to anything. We do get, later on in the film, we learn that C has some involvement with Spectre itself. Big shocker, didn't see that one coming. But it's just not much to it. As I said, it's just a device used to give our minor characters something to do throughout the film. So you're not
Yes.
watching it going, oh, I wonder what M's doing right now. And with the
Who
older
even
Bond
thinks that?
yeah, I know, right? And it's like with the older Bond films, like you didn't care. You're there to see Bond. You're with Bond pretty much exclusively throughout the entire
Yeah.
film, unless he goes back. You follow Bond back to London where he has his mission briefing, or he meets up with them midway through his mission, or anything like that. He'll meet up with Q. Q will give him all the convenient gadgets that he will use systematically throughout the entire film. It's just to give them something to do, and I do think that those moments, especially in the second act, is where the subplot really kicks in, and those were the moments where most of the people in the cinema seem to be getting restless. This is what I'm talking about with the pacing in the second act. It's where
So
Bond's just had his action scene, I think, in Austria, and he sort of posts up in that house with Dr. Swan.
L'American.
And they're just there. They're sort of just nothing's happening.
They're not even flirting. They exclusively say, we are not flirting.
Yeah.
And you're just like, oh, come on, please, do something.
Yeah.
Just anything.
But it is in that scene where they're holed up in that building, and I know we're sort of all over the place with this, but we knew that this was what it's going to be like. Following Skyfall, Sam Mendes carries on his tradition of adding CGI animals into his film. My review of Skyfall, in one sentence, is CGI Komodo dragons. My review for Spectre is CGI rat, which looked
What
very
about this
indicative.
CGI lizard? The
Was that
gecko.
CGI lizard?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So we get two. So we still get CGI lizards in it. But I was watching this thing with the rat, and I'm like, wow, you really couldn't just hire a rat? I mean, I know you've got to train it and stuff, and that uses vast amounts of expensive dollar that you could be spending on more car chases and explosions and stuff. But I mean, it was noticeably CGI. I'll just say that it did. There were moments where I was
dead
watching
rat
it.
on a stick would have looked like just
I want to see
poking
like
it into shot and then just pulling it away into the hole would have looked so much better.
I wanted to see like Rizzo the rat from the Muppets just on camera for that whole scene. But no, there were moments where I was looking at it, because I'm going to say this as well. I have a huge phobia of rats. I absolutely hate them. When I see them on screen, my toes curl up. I lift my feet off the floor just in case there's any rats that want to come out at that opportune moment. But I saw it. I sort of tensed up and went, oh, it's CGI, okay. I just put my feet back down. But there were moments where it did look like Remy from Ratatouille. I'm not going to harp on it loads. It's really quick, but...
The rat ex machina. He completely saves the day.
He does! You're right! And you
this
know what?
film wouldn't exist if a rat didn't come out of his little house and, dive back into his home when Bond points a gun at him for no apparent reason.
I was like, what's that rat done wrong? Come on. There's spoiler alert, the rat turns out to be the big henchman.
The whole reason why this plotline exists is because Bond wakes up in the middle of the night for no reason, sees a rat on the floor, points a gun at the rat, speaks to the rat, and the rat runs back into his hole.
It's like, do you feel lucky, punk? And the rat just runs off back to his hole. But give a bit of context for the scene. When the rat runs back in later on, he finds that there's a room where the rats ran into, the hole, there's a hollow wall. And, he taps the wall a little bit and does the most stupidest thing where he punches the wall. I'm like, why couldn't you have kicked that? What if that had been a solid wall? That would have been hilarious. He would have broken every single bone in his hand if he'd have hit the wrong place.
He was a little bit too left.
Yeah. But, in there, and you were, telling me things, because, as I said, I saw this last night, I didn't pick up on everything. He finds a tape from Vesper, obviously that was his love interest from...
what was it, the Vesper torture tapes from...
Torture tapes, yeah.
Casino Royale, which we don't know about.
No,
too
but I
much. We
mean,
know nothing about that, so I'm surprised that they didn't look into that a little bit further.
again, one of the things, like the strengths of this film, as I said, with like tying back into the old ones, it will definitely make you go back and sort of watch those earlier ones and have a lot more context now. Even I believe his name is Mr. White, who was sort of the guy behind the scenes of everything in Casino Royale, is the guy who Bond shoots in the knee at the end of that film. I've only seen Quantum of Solace once, and I can't really remember it, but I think that he was in that film too. He gets quite a prominent role in this film in terms of like setting up the plot and everything, and it was sort of like cool to see it all come in full circle, all tying into each other. And as I say, like with the whole Vesper torture tapes, gives a lot more sort of backstory and substance to her character, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
Even like the villains like Silver and Lashif get mentioned quite frequently throughout the film as well, and we see their pictures. That was really cool to see. But going back a bit, so after like the whole London stuff, Bond gets injected with nano machines, isn't it? In his
Yeah.
bloodstream, or some where they can keep track of
They
him,
can
basically
track him.
pinpoint his location on the map. Yeah, and he like pulls Q aside and says, "Look, I need you to make me disappear." And that was actually a funny scene where Q's sort of like covering for him, and he says like, "Oh, because this is new technology, it's sort of like might glitch, and you might drop off the radar for 24 hours or so." And like Bond just like glares at him. He goes, 48 hours, and then you'll be back on back on the map. That was cool. Um, so he heads to Rome, and I will say that the entire Rome sequence was gorgeous. But when you sort of see when the film ends and you look back on it, it is kind of mostly superfluous, really.
Yeah.
Like he arrives there and he meets up with Monica Bellusci's character, whose husband's been murdered, but he notices that she's not mourning, she's not particularly sad,
Nope.
and she's
She's
aware
just
that she's going to
incredibly
be
horny.
hunted next. Yeah. We get the obligatory, foreplay scene with Bond and her. And then she's pretty much dropped out of the movie. And I think
Yep,
in the trailer
done.
she gets like a pretty prominent role in the first part of the trailer. And when they were saying that Monica Bellucci is going to be in this film, I thought she was going to be a much more prominent character, but she's
The
just
Bond
sort of
girl, but no, she wasn't.
yeah. And I was saying this before we hit record. Like I wouldn't even call her a Bond girl. I'd call her a Bond acquaintance. She's just sort of there just to give us an entry into the action scene in Rome,
To
which,
be honest,
granted,
she could have just not been in the film, and the film would have been fine. Sadly.
I'm trying to think about it, and I'm sure there are some plot points that link you to the Austria section, but really, you could just lift that entire section
Yeah.
out and just have had Bond go from London straight to Austria. Done. Go
Yeah.
after Mr. White to learn from there, then go and rescue Dr. Swan. You could have just done that. But the whole Rome sequence, I mean, it's another exotic location, looks absolutely gorgeous, like through the car chase at night. We
Yeah.
get to see Dave Bautista in a sweet car chase, and we actually do get somewhat of the old gadgets from Bond, but again, they do seem really out of place when you get this new tone. We get the car with the flamethrower at the back. I don't know if it's a nitrous to make him go faster, if it was literally just a flamethrower.
I think it was just
And
flamethrower.
And then he has an ejector seat, and we get Bond with like the parachute landing in the street.
That's the old Bond. That
That's
there
the
is
old Bond. And that's what I want to see. I want to see the Union Jack parachute back. I want to
Yes.
see stuff like that back.
I think everyone wants to see that.
But like in the car chase, like they even try moments of comic relief, and it really doesn't fit. It's almost tonally inconsistent with the rest of it. It's like that bit where he's driving down the narrow street and there's a slow car in front of him, so he accelerates to try and push the old driver out of the way, and that's played for laughs. But it just seems not slapsticky, but it seems too comedic for this kind of film. I know
Yeah.
we want comedy, but I mean, if you've established your tone as serious, you've got to see that tone through to the end. If you start with comedy, you've got to be consistent with that. But on the surface, the car chase is phenomenal. Gorgeous location, phenomenal cinematography, really great action scene. We get to see Dave Bautista in action. And one scene I think we need to talk about, and this may be where your negative comes in, I'm not sure, is where we actually get introduced to Spectre. And we get to see, Christoph Waltz on camera.
Yeah. Okay. Here we go.
Brilliantly set up. Bond sort of like gets into this conference with it having. It's the classic Bond layout with the big long tables with all all the organisations, all the dastardly evil corporations from all around the world, sort of like sitting around the table discussing their evil plans. The seat at the head of the table is empty, and you know exactly who that's saved for. Christoph Waltz walks in, and this is what I was talking about earlier with like the silence where it's perfect. There's no music or anything. You hear the echoes of his footsteps walking across to his chair. You've got the advisors at his side who is whispering, you can't hear what he's saying. And then when he speaks, I'm like, this is the Bond villain we deserved. This was the Bond villain I was wishing we'd have got with Javier Bardem, because he's a fantastic actor, and if anyone's seen No Country for Old Men, you know what that actor is capable of, and I think he was completely wasted in Skyfall as the villain. But here, this was the Bond villain I wanted, and this was the Bond villain I got. When Christoph Waltz sits there, and he's all masked in just silhouette, you just hear his menacing voice, and then Dave Bautista walks in. This is the first introduction to Dave Bautista. They assign one of the guys on a new mission. Bautista walks in. Like they say, like, will anyone, question this guy going on this mission? Dave Bautista walks in, just like slams his head off the table, puts his eyes out with his thumbs, and breaks his neck, and just sits in the chair. I was like, oh my god, yes, this is the henchman I also wanted, and the henchman I've got. But I mean, if you want to talk more about, go for it, man.
My problem is that there is too many villains. It's the opposite to Skyfall's problem. Skyfall, there was one big villain. That was it. And the problem with that was there was nothing to back him up, because once you've defeated him, he's out. With this film, there was too many villains, and what the villains did conflicted with each other. I mean, I know we'll probably talk about this in a bit, but there's one scene where Dave Bautista is literally trying to kill Bond on a train, and Bond is trying to go and see the main villain, Franz Oberhauser. So why would he want to kill him if he's going to be killed by the main guy anyway? It makes no sense in the context, and the whole subplot with C, it wasn't needed. You've got 3 different storylines going on there. You need one storyline for Bond, and you can have 2 villains in that storyline. That's how Bond has always worked. It's a formula that you just don't change.
It's like the end of Phantom Menace. Always 2 there are, no more, no less. I can agree with that. I don't have a problem with Christoph Waltz or Dave Bautista. You always have the main villain, you always have the henchman. This is what I was saying. I do think that the subplot does sort of add another layer of complication, and it was almost like, even when they were getting to the end of that film, they were like, oh shit, we've got C as well. Just kill him off, because we need to focus on the main villain. Yeah. That's what it seemed like to me. I will agree with that, and you're right, because there's never really sort of an attempt of Batista wanting to take Bond in, to take him to Christoph Waltz.
He just wants to kill him.
He just wants to kill him, and you're right. Now I think about it, that does completely contradict his plot. I mean, when eventually Bond gets to Africa, a car is sent for him to take him to the place. It seems like Christoph Waltz wants to humour him with that, that meeting, because he wants to lay out his evil, dastardly plan, which all Bond villains do. He wants to tell him about the connection they've had when they were kids. And by the way, can we get onto the whole villain thing now? Because we've sort of been skirting around this. Let's just go onto it. Surprise, surprise, Christoph Waltz plays Blofeld, who is probably, arguably, the most iconic Bond villain of the franchise.
So goddamn obvious.
It was obvious.
As soon as the trailer came out, the film's called Spectre. Oh yeah, he's Blofeld. Even if you don't say that he's Blofeld. We all know it.
Yeah,
we've seen how he's dressed.
Yeah.
We've seen what he looks like. Yeah.
Yeah. I was about to say like how he's dressed. I think in his original appearance, he was in a grey suit, basically the Dr. Evil suit, because that's who Dr. Evil was based on. But he had the same sort of jacket on and everything like that, so we knew it was going to be him. It was almost as obvious as Benedict Cumberbatch being Khan in Star Trek Into Darkness. Yeah. It was that level of predictability. But you know what? I don't mind, because I think that we needed Blofeld in this new series. It was great to see him. As I said, this is a reboot of the series, so anyone who says this is a continuation, in my opinion, is wrong. And I mean, what a way to get Blofeld into the reboot. Perfectly played, as I said, by Christoph Waltz. And
but was it needed?
Yes, it was. I think that at this stage of the series, putting Bond against his biggest nemesis yet was definitely needed. And as I said, like if this is Sam Mendes' last one, it would basically be like having a Batman series and ending your last film with Batman against the Joker. It's the main villain.
Okay.
It's his main opposition, and I think that works. I think that really ramped up the stakes for this series. And for anyone doubting that it was Blofeld, for me, and as I said, I'm not a Bond fan at all. I've seen most of the old ones now, but when you get the reveal of the White Cat,
Yeah.
I almost was like jumping up and down in my cinema seat, like, oh my god, doing the White Cat thing and everything like that. Unfortunately, you don't get a scene of him in like a rotating chair, menacingly stroking the White Cat, which I really wanted. He sort of like just walks up to it and like pats it on the head. But the fact that you got that, and this is what I'm talking about with those callbacks to the old ones, there were loads of moments like this, and they weren't crowbarred in. They felt naturalistic to me with this one. And then even later as well, where, Bond's getting tortured. We can talk about that bit as well in a minute, where Blofeld's got these weird, bizarre drills set up and wants mind control Bond, wasn't it? Or like mess with his brain and things like that.
Something to do with drilling holes in his brain or something like that.
Yeah,
That's a weird evil plan.
Yeah, and as I said, like with his evil plan, like I don't really know how that filled into his main scheme. As I said, I saw it yesterday. I've only seen it once. I'm sure he explains it, but it was really quick. It was just like, oh, I can mess around with your brain and like pick at bits and turn you into a different person or something. It was really bizarre.
And he was like, if I poke this hole here, then you will not remember any of our faces. And then the first thing he does is remember someone's face.
Yeah. It was just so convenient, wasn't it, just for him to get out of it. But and then later on as well, when sort of Bond has this watch that blows up, he orchestrates this scheme, he throws it, blows up the compound, escapes, and then later in the film, clearly Blofeld isn't dead, but he comes back and he's got that dead eye
Scar.
and the scar across his eye, and I was really hoping to do that. To my knowledge, if I'm remembering correctly, Blofeld was in the older Bond films 3 times. Donald Pleasance played him in the first incarnation, and he was the only one to have that scar over his eye. And it's sort of, I think that's iconic to the character. Yeah. And I'm really glad they did that. And I mean, it looked awesome at the end when he's up against him. Are there any other moments of the film you particularly want to touch on? Because I think I've been talking too much in this, and I want you to get into the nitty-gritty of why you really didn't like this film.
Do you really want to know why I really didn't like this film?
Yeah, also if you brought up your negative as well, if we got into that.
My negative was there was too many villains.
Right, okay.
So, way too many villains. The plot, I sometimes felt lost in it. I didn't understand why they were going to Monica Bellucci's character. I just didn't understand why he then had to go to this meeting. It was all over the place. The characters didn't know what their own plans were. I mean, like, somehow Christopher Waltz's character, Gustavo Blofeld, kidnaps, I can't even remember her name now. I've watched it, like, earlier. I must be tired. Leia Seydoux' character of Madeline Swan, kidnaps her and somehow sticks her on the top floor of a building within 20 minutes. That's what the clock said.
Yeah.
And then manages to get downstairs into the opposite side of the building somehow, and sets up this trap for Bond, all in 20 minutes. He must be a brilliant interior designer. That's all I can say.
Now you see, again, if this was in the old Bonds, you'd be completely fine with that because they were campy and it was just like, oh yeah, it's evil henchmen. Because these are realistic. And I didn't even realise this because of how well he'd set it up and everything. He's almost got like Jigsaw from Saw level foresight and like time to set all this intricate stuff up. That was the MI6 building, wasn't it, that blew up?
The one that has been monitored by many people for many days ever since, which was mentioned.
And it's empty, with no security in there at all. Does everyone just sort of like have a 9-to-5 job, just like lock up and leave it there overnight?
Hold on, it's MI5, which means it's head of British security. I saw pieces of paper on the floor. If that hasn't been picked up or swept up or monitored, then we're in serious danger.
It literally wasn't until the exterior shot when the building actually blows up that I noticed the location of it now. I turned to my friend and I was like, "Is that the MI6 building?" And has that blew up again? Because I swear to God that blew up in Skyfall as well. They
It
like
did.
blowing up that building. Yeah. So they
I
refill
think
it,
they
it gets
had the
blown up again.
practical effects to blow it up, and they just applied the day setting to night.
Yeah. And I remember turning to him going like, "There's no security there. How did he get in?" I'm sure that Blofeld had people working for him in there, but to get in there, first he'd have to get his way in. Let's just say he did that. Then he's got to like do like weird Saw slash Joker paintings of arrows to lead Bond to where he needs to
Yeah.
go. Then he needs to take his place behind the glass. You're telling me there's no. Well, I know like the cameras would be controlled by C and stuff, but there's no people patrolling.
None.
There's no people still working there. None of this is going on. So I will completely agree with that. That was very much a stretch at the end, and it
And-
just seemed like
Just to add to the misery, um, a, I'd say a very strong female character in Dr. Madeline Swan.
yeah,
Very reluctant at first. Very reluctant even after her life is saved. Very reluctant even after her life is saved for the second time. Soon
Yeah.
as her life is saved, sorry, she saves his life, she gives in.
yeah.
It's just ridiculous. I mean, if
It
you're
was-
going to have a strong, empowering woman playing a Bond girl, I know there hasn't been many of those, you've got to stick to that. You can't have
Yeah.
a collapse at the single time where you'd expect her just to be strong. It just goes against the character, what the character stood for. Like, she had no reason to like Bond. He basically killed her dad. Even if she didn't like her dad, she had photos of her dad and she felt a connection with him. Her dad taught her how to defend herself and basically raised her. And she doesn't despise this man, even though he's protecting her. It's just, it
And one
messes
thing
with my
I
head.
must have missed is the scene where they go to Blofeld's and he's got them cornered in that corridor,
Yeah.
and he's playing the security footage of when Bond went to her father,
Yeah.
and he's playing that back, and Bond's like screaming out like, "Don't look at it," because he probably doesn't want her to see, her dad die. But she turns around and just gives him this like resting bitch face, like it's Bond's fault. I'm sorry, but to me there was nothing in that
No,
security
it was
footage that
mercy.
made. Yeah, it didn't make Bond look like a bad guy. He went there and said, like, "Who's the person I'm looking for?" Mr.
I'm
White
going to
told
protect
him.
your daughter. Here's
Yeah,
a gun so you
exactly.
can kill yourself.
He-
Put you
yeah,
out of your
he's-
misery.
He said, "I will go and protect your daughter." And as soon as he says that in the video, she turns around, and if looks could kill, like he'd be dead on the floor right there.
Yeah.
And Bond's like, with this expression, like a look of regret, like, "Oh, I wish I hadn't have said that. Now, she's going to be mean at me." I'm like, "Why? You did your mission. You rescued her from Batista on the train and the action scene with the plane in the snow. You did what you set out to do."
That
And
face,
now she's angry at you?
I'm telling you, that face is, okay, I'm completely lost with the plot now, what's going on? She's like, Bond, what is actually going on here? I have no clue.
And that to me is a trait that's in most of these Bond films, to be honest. They do get to a stage where they start off strong, they have a clear direction of where they're going, and they do tend to meander on for quite a while, to the point where it's like they make it up as they go along. And I think, again, with
Here's
one
the
of my
thing,
negatives...
though. Here's the thing. The other Bond films, if you look at most of them, they're 2 hours or less. Most of
Yeah.
them are below the 2 hour mark. This one is half an hour longer than most Bond films. Is that half an hour needed?
Yeah. And I mean, I understand that, with pace, you have big action scenes, you have to follow that up with a moment of downtime. I get that, I get how pacing works, but I do think that a lot sort of like was happening in the second act. A lot was happening, but nothing was happening. That's the best
Yeah.
way I can describe it. I'm trying to think of anything. Oh, going back to Blofeld as well for like the ending and stuff. I thought that the connection they gave to Bond and him with like their childhood, like it was a theme, it was a thread throughout the entire movie, but it was one that I don't think really got paid off or
Very
referred
weak
to all
thread.
that much. It was the typical trope of like when Bond's parents were killed, Blofeld's parents or father was the one who took him in, and he treated Bond as a son and probably gave him more of attention than he did to Blofeld. And Blofeld hated this because he was the rejected son, and his dad was a meanie poopy head, so he got him killed in a mountain accident, I believe.
Yeah.
I think that's what it was. And again, from Bond, there's no emotion of like, you essentially killed his second father, or anything, or any connection that they were brothers or anything like that. You know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of the ending of Austin Powers Goldmember, where Dr. Evil finds out that he's brothers with Austin Powers, and they run at each other and just lovingly embrace. It just felt really weak. There's no sort of revelation in Bond's expression or his acting or in the plot or anything like that. Really, you could have lost all of that and just had Blofeld be the guy who sees, but it's almost like a sort of Moriarty Sherlock thing. Like, he sees Bond as his natural equal and wants to prove himself that he's better than him.
Yeah.
And wants to kill him, like as he says in the film, which is one of my favourite lines in the film, where he says, "I've been the author of all your pain." Like that, just have it be that. Just have Blofeld be this just huge like organization of like the head of Spectre, who's just set out personally to destroy the life of this man. Just have it as that. We don't need any sort of like intricate like childhood past or anything like that, especially when it's never followed up. So I had a sort of problem with that because it was just sort of raised, never referred to, and didn't really filter into much of the rest of the plot. And I'm trying to just think if there's anything else I can touch on. I really like the train sequence.
Yeah, I thought it was a very good action sequence. Very good setup as well. A bit sudden, and for some strange reason, everyone on that train disappeared very quickly.
Oh my god, that's a good point. That's a great point. I didn't even think about that.
All disappeared. Like, I saw nobody else. Usually you have actors crashing into people, and then they put a suave line at the end, like, he was tied down. Or something like that.
I was waiting for a one-liner at that moment when he ties the metal back, like they sort of like kegs or something, and he goes flying out. I was so expecting
I guess the
a
anchor
one-liner
dropped
from Bond.
then.
Yeah. And in the older Bonds, you'd get that, and you'd sort of like groan and roll your eyes, but you'd smile
so
because
good.
it's Bond. Yeah. And really, Batista gets the one-liner. He just sort of like looks at him and just goes, "Oh shit!" And then he gets pulled out of the train. And I know there's rumours that he's signed up for multiple pictures, so I'm sure he's going to come back. And I was talking to George earlier just to get his thoughts on what he thought of it. He loved it, by the way. He thought it was probably the best one of the Craigs.
We need
one
to
of
have
the
a
best
chat.
ones. Yeah,
George, if you're listening to this, we need to have a chat.
I love that. You just like put your hand on his shoulder, George. We need to talk, okay? So just sit down. But no, he loved it, and I'm trying to think, what was my train
Do
of
you love
thought?
the bit where they rode off into the sunset like nothing went wrong?
Yeah, he thought that was a fitting ending, but I know what I was going to say now. What is common with these Bond films is that Bond will defeat the bad guy, and he'll think that everything's completely fine at the end, but then the henchman will have survived, and he'll have one more crack at trying to kill Bond. Bond will defeat them, and then it will be the ending from there. So George was expecting Batista to come back in the last bit and kill Madeline Swan. Now, I think that would have been it would have tacked on like another 5 or 10 minutes to the film.
Yeah.
And it would have just been...
That would have been an okay ending. Because it would have
think?
Well, take away the comedy out of the film and add that in, and that would have been devastating.
See, I think that would have been too much like Casino Royale. Like, everything seems fine, and when Le Chiffre dies...
Good point.
When Le Chiffre dies, that's sort of the movie's natural, logical climax at that bit. I've always thought that. And then you sort of get an extended epilogue where he's settling down, and then that all goes on from there. So I think that would have been too close to that. It would have been nice to see Batista at least take like one last crack at them in London, perhaps. And then he beats him, then gets in the car and drives off. That would have seemed more classic Bond. But I think that, one, how long this film was, and two, sort of how it ended against Blofeld and the tone it was set in. As I say, like, there is a sense of like finality, I would say, to this end scene, to like everything. As I said, like, drives off into the sunset with the girl in the car. In the original car, it's the perfect ending for Bond. The main theme kicks in, drives off, everything's accomplished. So I don't think that Batista needs to come back, and I mean they'll probably bring him back in the next one or one of the other ones. I believe that I've only seen Jaws' first appearance, but I believe that he came back a couple of times as well. So it would seem like that to me. We've been going for about an hour and a half almost, coming up to it. I sort of want to give you the round now and just sort of give your sort of more in-depth summary now we're in the spoiler section of your review of this film.
Well, kids, this one's a toughie. I'm afraid your Uncle Bond isn't doing too well at the moment. He's acting a little bit too much like Mr. Bourne, who we're not friends with. Well, we are friends with, but not in this context. He seems to have lost all of his cheer in life. So he's gone on a holiday with his girlfriend, and hopefully when he gets back he'll be slightly better. Maybe? I don't know. He may have a different director following him in the back car with the camera.
He may have a different face.
He may have a different face, yeah. He may just go have a relaxing spa, come back a different person. You never know. Just stay hopeful. He'll be fine. Don't worry. If you want to go see him, you can in the cinema right now, or you can see him when he comes out on DVD. But just know that he isn't the same, and we love him, and we respect his wishes.
Okay. I've got to follow that. I'm just gonna keep it. You got into like character there, and I'm just gonna keep it to a boring bog standard review. Summary. I personally really enjoyed it. I mean, taken out of the equation, if this is the incarnation of Bond you like and you want to see, if I just take that aside and just sort of accept that and assess it for the film it is, does it do what it's meant to? I think yes. I think it's got more of the ingredients of the older Bond. Yes, it doesn't have the jokes or the levity or the humour which we probably want and would be more entertaining, but if you're looking for a more grounded Bond, I think this, as I said, it's definitely the best entry in the series that we've had since Casino Royale. Leaps and bounds better than Skyfall, but again, I tend to have I'm being sarcastic here, a very popular opinion when it comes to films like this, and everyone and their mother seemed to love Skyfall, so clearly I didn't notice something in that film that everyone else did. I really didn't like Skyfall. I think this is leaps and bounds better than that. It does have moments in the second act where it really slows down, but I think that the action set pieces, whether it be the opening one, which is phenomenal, whether it be the train sequence, the Austria sequence, or anything like that, and I just found all the stuff with James Bond against Blofeld fascinating. It was great seeing Blofeld in this series played superbly by Christoph Waltz. I think that all the performances for the most part are great. As I said, I'm not a fan of Daniel Craig's Bond at all, so I would probably discard him from that criticism there. But I think it's still a solid action movie. Like, it's a solid sort of like spy Bond movie of recent times. It's one of my favourites from the series, probably. But as I said, if you're not a fan of this, which you clearly aren't, take like the sort of more darker, taking itself seriously Bond, don't get your hopes up, because this doesn't do anything to change that. So whether you're looking forward to the next Bond after this, whether hopefully they'll get a different director or a new Bond, go in a different direction, whatever they're going to do, this film's still going to make a killing. Chances are you've probably seen the film already if you're a Bond fan. If you haven't, I would definitely recommend seeing this film on the big screen to take in all the great landscapes, the exotic locations, and the beautiful cinematography. I think it's well shot. I think it's well directed. As you said, though, the plot does tend to get a little bit convoluted, which I think is a common element with these Bond films. And sort of when you see it, and now you've mentioned like all the stuff with like C and Blofeld's plan, I do think that gets a little muddled.
Yeah.
But that aside, I think it's still a solid entry into the Bond series, and I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes after this one.
Is this really what you want? Living in the shadows? Hunting, being hunted, always alone.
I don't stop to think about it.
It was me, James. The author of all your pain.
So I realised that this review may have been very rambly in parts because we were sort of just like picking out whatever bits, but I think we both knew that that's sort of how it was going to be.
Don't worry, Uncle Bond said he's coming back soon.
Bond will return. I sat through the entire credits. So yeah, please rate, like, comment, subscribe if you made it through this hour and a half review of Spectre and really the
Good
Bond
job.
franchise in general.
Good job.
Let us know if you liked it, if you didn't like it, what you liked about it, what you didn't. I don't think this movie is out in the US yet. I'm not exactly sure when they get it, but I'm sure they'll get it fairly soonish. You can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/cinemasavvy. You can follow us at Twitter at twitter.com/cinema_savvy, and we're also on letterboxd.com/cinema_savvy. So get involved with the channel, bringing out much more regular videos now. And we've got some good ones coming up, I believe. November, we've got the new Hunger Games film. December, obviously, is going to be Star Wars. We're going to have a Star Wars month on the channel for that one, so that's going to be fun. So get involved with the channel because we want to increase the fan base, and we love talking movies, and we'd like to talk movies more with the fans and people who follow the channel. So I'm sort of all bombed out at the minute. I know I need to get back and I need to watch all the other ones, the Roger Moore ones, but I think I'm gonna let it lie a bit because when you talk for an hour and a half, as great it is on Bond, you sort of need to watch some other stuff. So I'm completely forgetting. We need to do recommended movie.
That's your choice this week.
It is. Oh wow. I'm really put on the spot here.
What are you going for?
I've got two possible ones. I'm going to let you make the decision of which one we watch.
Don't make me decide. I'm terrible with decisions.
The first is Road to Perdition, and the link with that is that obviously that was a Sam Mendes directed film, and Daniel Craig's also in it. And it's been a while since I've seen it, but I remember it being a fantastic film. So that's choice number one. Choice number two, because we haven't had any Tarantino on the channel so far, is Inglourious Bastards, and the link for that is the obvious Christoph Waltz link. Both amazing films, and I'd be good to review either, but I'm going to let the decision fall to you this week of which one we review.
Well, even though I've never actually seen Road to Perdition, and I do need to see it, I think you can never go wrong with Tarantino, so I'm going to choose the Bastards.
Right, I'm completely fine with that. I don't even think I'll need to rewatch that one because I've seen it so many times that.
Oh, but you will, won't you?
That one. oh, definitely, probably. So yeah, that will be our review for Film Club later this week. So that'll be Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds. Looking forward to talking about that one. But yeah, that'll do it for our main show this week. Next week for our main show, we also have our Halloween special. We haven't really decided yet of what we're going to be doing for that, whether we're just going to be reviewing a horror film, we might do an audio commentary for a film, or we might even just do like another top 10 list of our favourite horror films, but we'll decide that. We'll post that on the Facebook and Twitter groups once we decide what we're doing. And until then, thanks for listening.